The ancient Ulian professor glowered at his young students, grimly recounting the time deranged human warriors massacred 10,000 of his kin in a single blood-soaked night. Many cycles ago, when we Ulians took our first tentative steps to the stars, we encountered a species whose minds were warped by an insatiable lust for violence. A species called human, Jackson growled. Our survey ships watched their soldiers butcher each other by the millions, fighting over dwindling patches of irradiated dirt on their blasted homeworld. It was like watching a nest of crazed vermin. The withered historian slammed his fist on the lectern. The High Council, in their infinite arrogance, decided these pitiful creatures would be the perfect slaves. Imagine our surprise when their puny ships attacked on sight. Jackson gestured to the flickering holodisplay, showing a grizzled human in battle-scarred armor. This is Christian Murphy. Remember that name, children. He led the human attack that nearly shattered our empire. The display zoomed out, revealing an armada of Ulian warships in tight formation around the contested border systems. Their hulls bristled with the latest Devastator cannons and kinetic batteries, each vessel capable of reducing a planet to molten slag. We thought our superior numbers and technology would grind them down in weeks, Jackson muttered. We didn't realize that their insanity was a weapon, that each of them would keep fighting, even as our disruptors burned the flesh from their bones. Even as we executed their families in front of them, they never broke. The professor's eyes narrowed. The Council is hiding something about those weeks, about how close we came to defeat, because if the humans hadn't shown mercy, we wouldn't be standing here now. Pray you never see them angry again. The old professor's voice dropped to a whisper. We thought the colony would be an easy target, a quick victory to crush the human spirit, if only we knew what we were really facing. Jackson shook his head. When our forces landed, the humans were already in motion. They vanished into the mines and machinery of their colony, taking up defensive positions. We sent squads to hunt them down. The few who came back were babbling about traps and ambushes. The holodisplay flickered, showing scenes of vicious close-quarters combat in dimly lit tunnels. Humans wielding makeshift weapons cobbled together from power tools and mining gear. Ulian soldiers being dragged screaming into the shadows. That's when we first saw Murphy, Jackson growled. He was everywhere, rallying his people, leading hit-and-run attacks. One day he'd be sniping our officers from the refinery catwalks. The next he'd be jury-rigging mining charges to collapse entire levels on our heads. The display changed to thermal imaging, tracking a dozen Ulian heat signatures moving cautiously through a narrow mineshaft. Suddenly the tunnel walls flared white-hot before the feed dissolved into static. Jackson sighed. We lost an entire platoon in that shaft. Tons of rock reduced them to paste. The few survivors said Murphy himself led them into the trap, and that he looted their bodies for weapons and explosives after. The professor's voice trembled. Again and again the humans struck without warning, vanishing before we could retaliate. We had them outgunned and outnumbered, but it didn't matter. Each raid chipped away at our strength, our will to fight. Jackson paused, collecting himself. There was one soldier, Voss. Half his body burned away by an incendiary round, but he kept crawling forward, straight into an Ulian firebase. He was clutching something, a grenade, stolen from a previous battle. He looked our troopers right in the eyes and smiled. The blast took out half the compound, along with our top commanders. After that, even our most battle-hardened veterans started to question if this fight was worth it. The old professor's eyes flashed with anger as he recounted the Ulians' next move. Our commanders were desperate. They couldn't accept being beaten by primitives, so they gave the order to bombard the colony from orbit, with no regard for civilian lives. The holodisplay lit up with scenes of utter devastation. Plasma beams rained down from Ulian ships, vaporizing hab blocks and blast furnaces. Firestorms raged across the once thriving settlement, leaving only charred metal and ash. Jackson's voice shook. We thought that would break them, that they'd finally surrender, but we underestimated their resilience, their sheer stubbornness. The display showed a ragged band of survivors, led by Murphy, taking shelter in the labyrinthine mines honeycombing the planet's crust. They huddled in cramped tunnels, tending to the wounded, scavenging for scraps. Murphy never gave up, Jackson said. Even as his people starved and sickened, he kept them going, kept them focused on fighting back. The professor pulled up a schematic of a ramshackle communications array cobbled together from salvaged parts. This was their lifeline. Murphy and his engineers managed to build this deep underground, shielded from our scans. They got a distress call out to the human fleet. The display shifted to a view of space, where a cluster of human warships suddenly appeared, weapons bristling. At their center was a massive dreadnought, the Relentless. Admiral Nora Hawkins, Jackson said, a legend even among our kind. She outfoxed our blockade and caught the invasion force with its guard down. The audience watched in awe as the human fleet engaged the Ulians. The human ships were heavily modified, sporting unconventional weapons and jury-rigged defenses. They moved with fluid grace, dancing between the lumbering Ulian battleships. Hawkins used a gravity well projector to yank a third of our fleet out of position, Jackson explained. Bunched them up for her gunners. It was a turkey shoot. As the space battle raged, the display cut back to the surface, where Murphy and a strike team were assaulting a fortified Ulian position. The humans moved with the speed and precision of a pack of Terran wolves, overwhelming the defenders. Jackson pointed to a towering anti-aircraft cannon. That was their target. They seized control and started blasting our ships out of the sky. It was chaos. Our forces were caught in a vice, pounded from above and below. The old Ulian's eyes narrowed. But even as we teetered on the brink of defeat, our commanders revealed the depths of their ruthlessness. They had one last gambit, a final roll of the dice. Jackson's voice dropped to a whisper. A bioweapon, engineered to target human DNA specifically. It would have wiped out every man, woman, and child on that colony. 1 billion souls snuffed out in a breath. The audience recoiled in horror. The idea of such callous disregard for life was unthinkable. I'll never forget the look on Murphy's face when he found out, Jackson said. The fury, the disgust, but also the fear. He knew what that weapon meant for his people. The professor paused, collecting himself. But in our darkest hour a light shone through. A group of our own scientists, led by a brilliant xenogeneticist named Zoran, rebelled against the plan. They couldn't stomach the idea of genocide. Jackson pulled up an image of a slender Ulian with haunted eyes. Zoran contacted Murphy directly, warning him about the bioweapon, offered to help stop it. It was an unprecedented act of courage and conscience. The display shifted to a schematic of the Ulian command ship. Murphy put together a strike team, the best of the best, and with Zoran's inside knowledge, they slipped aboard, determined to disable that abomination before it could be unleashed. The audience watched, transfixed, as helmet cam footage played out. Murphy and his soldiers moved like ghosts through the ship's corridors, neutralizing patrols with ruthless efficiency. Zoran guided them via comms, his voice tight with tension. The fighting was brutal, Jackson said. The Ulian commander had deployed his elite guard, gene-boosted berserkers, each worth 12 regulars. They threw themselves at Murphy's team with no regard for their own lives. The footage dissolved into a chaotic melee of close-quarters combat. Humans and Ulians grappled in the dimly lit passageways, fighting hand-to-hand with knives, stun batons, even their bare fists. But Murphy wouldn't be denied, Jackson said. He battled his way to the bridge, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake, and there he confronted the Ulian commander himself. The display zoomed in on a towering figure in ornate armor, his eyes glinting with malice. He lunged at Murphy, moving with the blinding speed and power of Ulian gene mods. It was like watching a Terran bear fight an Ulian plains cat, Jackson said. The commander was stronger, faster. His blows crumpled steel. But Murphy, he had something else. The human tenacity. The refusal to yield. The two warriors clashed in a hurricane of strikes and counters, their armor cracking under the onslaught. Murphy took a glancing blow that sent him crashing into a bulkhead, but he pushed himself up, spitting blood. With a roar, Murphy charged back in, ducking under a haymaker and slamming his fist into the control panel for the ship's grav plating. The display flared a warning red, and suddenly the commander was staggering, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Murphy had evened the odds, Jackson said. He used the shifting gravity to disorient the commander, to negate his physical advantages. What followed was less a battle than a beating, a systematic dismantling. As the mangled body of the Ulian commander slid to the floor, Murphy sagged against a console, his armor dented and scorched. But there was no time to rest. He had a mission to finish. With Zoran's help, Murphy located the bioweapon control room. They burst in, weapons ready, only to find a handful of terrified technicians. The weapon itself loomed in the center, a twisted mass of tubes and tanks. Murphy raised his rifle, prepared to reduce the abomination to scrap. But Zoran stepped forward. "Wait," the Ulian scientist said. "Let me." As Zoran approached the console, Murphy saw movement in the shadows. An Ulian guard, his face twisted with rage, leapt forward, a glowing plasma blade in hand. "Traitor!" the guard screamed, lunging at Zoran. Murphy reacted on instinct, shoving Zoran aside and bringing his rifle to bear. But he was a split second too slow. The guard's blade sliced through his armor, burning into his flesh. Murphy screamed, his vision going white with pain. He felt Zoran catch him as he fell. Through a haze, Murphy saw Zoran grappling with the guard. The two Ulians fought in a whirl of limbs and flashing blades. Then Zoran cried out, the guard's sword buried in his chest. With a last burst of strength, Zoran ripped free a plasma grenade from his belt and triggered the detonator. He looked to Murphy, his eyes filled with sorrow and determination. "For both our peoples," he whispered. Then he lunged forward and tackled the guard, bearing them both back into the bioweapon. The grenade detonated in a searing flash. The weapon shattered, pieces of it scattered across the room, and Zoran was gone, consumed in the blast along with his killer. Murphy hauled himself to the intercom, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "This is Murphy. The weapon is destroyed. Ulian command is down. All units, stand down." In the days that followed, a strange quiet fell over the colony. The Ulian forces, their chain of command shattered, their doomsday weapon reduced to atoms, laid down their arms. Human soldiers, many still bleeding from 100 wounds, looked to the sky as the Ulian ships turned and fled. The cost had been high. The colony was in ruins, its people battered and bloodied, and everywhere there were graves to be dug, human and Ulian alike. Murphy stood among the rubble, his arm in a sling, as an Ulian delegation approached under a flag of truce. Their leader, a tall, slender figure in flowing robes, bowed low. "On behalf of the Ulian Imperium," he said, his voice heavy, "I offer our surrender and our deepest apologies for the actions of our misguided brethren." Murphy felt a rage rising in him, hot and choking. How dare they? After all the death, all the destruction, they thought they could just apologize? He stepped forward, his good hand clenched into a fist. The Ulian delegation flinched back, fear in their eyes. "How you come here?" Murphy growled. "After burning our world, butchering our people, and you want to apologize?" He gestured to the ruins around them, his voice rising to a shout. "Look around you, see what your arrogance has wrought. The blood on your hands will never wash off." The Ulian leader trembled but held his ground. "Please, we seek to atone, to forge a new path of peace between our species." Murphy laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Peace? There can be no peace, not now, not ever." He leaned in close, his eyes burning into the Ulians. "Mark my words, we will never forget what happened here. We will never forgive, and we will be ready when you come again." The Ulians left in silence, their heads bowed, their grand dreams of conquest turned to ashes in their mouths. But Murphy's words echoed across the stars, a warning and a promise. In the years that followed, humanity rebuilt, but they also rearmed. The colonies became fortresses, bristling with guns and shielded against attack. The fleet swelled with new ships, each one a sleek, deadly blade aimed at the heart of the Imperium. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.